Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Gittin Daf Ayin Hey. We're going to start at the bottom of Ayin Dalet Bet. We saw this Mishnah about people who lived in walled cities, and they have a year in which after they sell the house to someone, so then the seller can actually buy it back within that first year, and after that it becomes the new buyer's property forever. So on the last day of the 12th month, that the people started hiding so that no one could find them. And then Hillel Hazaken, the people who want to buy back their land could go do it by basically putting it in an escrow account. And with that, they'd be able to do it against the will of the owner. So to which Rava said, we can learn from the second of Hillel that if somebody says to his wife, this is your get, on condition that you give me 200 zuz, and she gives him the money, it only works if he's willing to accept the money. If he doesn't want to accept the money, then it doesn't work. So it says, how do we know that this is true? Because the fact that Hillel needed to institute this idea that you could give against the will of the owner shows that basically Netina, that's how we ended Michlal, start of our daf today, that in general, giving against someone's will is not really considered giving. To which the Gemara says, or Rav Papa goes against this and says, no, maybe you missed the details that were important in that story. Matkav in the story with Hillel, Matkav Rav Papa v'tem Rav Shimi bar Ashi, either Rav Papa or Rav Shimi bar Ashi questioned this and said, the whole issue was people were hiding. So it wasn't the issue, wasn't the focus that it was against their will. The focus was it was against their knowledge. They weren't even there. They weren't in front of them. And that was the issue. But maybe if the person's there, it doesn't matter. Maybe it is considered giving. So if she gives him the 200 zuz to his face, he doesn't want to accept it. Maybe that's still, look, she gave it. The fact that he doesn't want to accept it is not her problem. So you can't necessarily learn from there. Amre, some people say that this was the exact reverse, that instead of Rava saying what we just thought, Rava said, Amarava, and this is the mirror image of the sugya. Mitakanato shel Hillel, what can you learn? And she gives it to him. Bein midato bein baal korcho havi netina. The giving against someone's will is not a problem. That's still giving. But the whole issue was that Hillel had to institute that it wasn't b'fanav. That was the case, that it wasn't in front of their face. Aval b'fanav, but once it's b'fanav, it should have worked. That was the whole idea. They hid. So therefore, it sounds like you can learn from here that actually, even if she gives the 200 zuz against his will, it should be fine. To which the response of Rav Papa now, Matkafla Rav Papa v'temer Rav Shimi bar Ashi, v'dilma afilu b'fanav nami v'dato in al korchalo. No, Rav Shimi bar Ashi says, who's to say that that's the issue? Maybe even if the guy was there, it would still be an issue. And it would only work. Even if he was there, it would only work if you bought it and he was willing to accept the money. But Baal Korcholo, but against his will, you wouldn't. And again, Hillel instituted against that we're changing that. But Hillel, and then why did Hillel do it specifically in this way when it was Shelo B'fanav? Well, Hillel, he just made this takana based on what he saw a need for. There was a need for this. So because there was a need for it, that's what he instituted. But it's all one and the same. It could have been any kind of against someone's will. It wouldn't work. And in this case, it was just against their will, not in front of their face. But against their will in front of their face might also have been a problem. So basically, we can't figure out either which way through both readings, right? It's not clear. Moving on. This we came across in a bunch of other places. Kol makom sheshana Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel b'mishnatenu halacha k'moto chutz mi'arev v'tzaidan u'ra'aya rona. So Rabbi Bar Chana says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, anytime that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel appears in a Mishnah, we're always going to paskin like him against whoever he argues with, other than three cases. One is our Mishnah, which is the case in Tzaidan, where he said, here's your get if you return me the itztalit, and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said, no, you can just return the value. You don't have to actually return the itztalit. We don't paskin that way. Okay, you can't just return the value. If he conditions it on something specific, you have to return that specific item. The other ones are arev, if you took out a loan. And it's specified in the loan that you can collect from whoever you want, whether the borrower or the guarantor. So there's a machloket about whether you can go directly to the arev or you have to go first to the lova. If the lova has money, then you can't go to the guarantor. And the third machloket is raya achrona, which is there's two machlokot about testimony. If someone says the second one is the one we don't hold like Rashbag, anyway, it's a case where you say, it's in Sanhedrin, it's where you say, I don't have any evidence, and then they rule based on that, and then you come later and you say you have evidence. And Tanakama says we don't accept it, and Rashbag says, what are we going to do about a person who didn't know he had testimony? And then the Tanakama says you must be lying. Why'd you say you don't have testimony and all of a sudden you do? Or I don't have any witnesses and then all of a sudden you pull out a witness. So Rashbag says, what do you mean? Maybe he didn't know he had a witness. Maybe he didn't know he had testimony. We have to allow him to do that, but we don't hold like Rashbag. Okay. Now we're going to get to Hanu Rabbanan, another Braita. This we saw previously in the beginning of the Masechet. This is your get, but I'm keeping the paper. This is no good. Why? Because he has to give her something in hand. And if the paper is still his, then it's like the letters are just floating in air and that's nothing she can grasp onto. So she's not divorced. Okay, that's not a good get. He says, under the condition that you return me the paper, she's divorced. Now the Gemara questions and says, why is that second case? Why is she divorced? And the premise of the question, there's two ways to read this. The premise of the question can either be, Al-Minat right now, the Gemara thinks, is not me'achshav, but Al-Minat means later this will take place. And if later that takes place, and then what happens? There's a condition. This is under the condition, this will be your get if you give me back the paper. Now, as soon as you give him back the paper, the condition will be fulfilled. The get will kick in, but the get can't kick in because she doesn't have a get in hand. If it only kicks in later, and it's not like mehayom, right, then it'll be a problem. Another reason is that there's this issue of get kritut. It has to be a complete separation. This isn't a complete separation because she has to give him back the paper, and then the get itself is not really completely separate. Anyway, let's leave that one aside. Let's just go with almanat right now. They think means later, and later what is when she fulfills the condition. When she fulfills the condition, the paper will no longer be hers, and then it won't be a get. She has to have a get in hand then. So they don't understand why really. Sefer really means why, if the first case, right, if you need to have the paper, which we assume she needs to have the paper at the time of the giving of the get, then why is the second case? How is it going to work? So we're going to have 5 answers to this question. Amar Rav Chisda, Hamane, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Da'amal, I hope I'm right about the 5 answers. Yeah, there's 5 answers. So Rav Chisda says the following. Hamani, who is this? This is, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. That's an easy way to explain this. Why? You say, Da'amal titain le'etameha. Hachanami, if she can fulfill the condition by basically giving the financial value of it, then she can fulfill this condition and still have her get in hand, because all she has to do is give him the value of the paper, and then she keeps her get, doesn't have to give him back the get itself, and all's good. And that would explain it. What's the problem? When did he allow it? When she lost the itztalit and she didn't have it anymore. Then he allows you to substitute something. But who's to say he's going to allow her to substitute something when she has the actual object? So here she has the paper. She shouldn't be able to give the value of it. It's only when she loses it. So that one we reject. Second option. El Amar Abai. Hamani, Rabbi Meir. You can explain this Mishnah according to Rabbi Meir. Damar. Now the next 3 explanations are all going to be based on the Tanai of Bnei Reuven and Bnei Gad. If you remember, they went to Moshe and they said, we want the land on the other side of the Jordan. We don't want to live in the land of Israel. We need a place for our animals to graze, for grazing for our sheep. We have a lot of cattle, livestock. Anyway, Moshe makes a condition with it. And now we're going to learn, they learn all sorts of rules about conditions from there. So basically, what we're going to say, we're going to roll them out one by one, okay? So the first rule is this. Abai says, this Braita, must match Rabbi Meir, who holds, Ta'amar be'inan t'nai kaful, v'hacha lo kafla l'tnai. T'nai kaful, there it says, if you go chalutzim before Bnei Israel, if you go out first, Moshe says to them, then you can have the land. And if you don't, then you won't. Now, this condition gave both sides of it. Our condition here only gave one side. So basically what we're going to say is, Hareza giteh al menat, on the condition that you give me back the paper. He didn't say, and this will not be your get if you don't give me back the paper. Because of that, it's not a good condition, because in order for something to be a condition, it has to be like the condition of Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven. And therefore, we ignore the condition, and it's just a get. He just said, Harez a get. So since he didn't double the condition, that's why she's actually divorced. Okay, it's a little bit of a weak answer, because the line before was Harez gitech b'niar shali, she's not Megureshet, because she has to, right, the Tanai is a good Tanai. And in general, we saw all these Tanaim, and we didn't say they all have to be a Tanai kaful. And all of these questions are really going to be a little difficult in light of all these conditions and stipulations that we saw in Gittin, which didn't seem to be the way all these kind of laid out. But anyway, the Gemara is going to reject these for other reasons. But I'm going to leave those questions open right now. Matkifla Rav. Tama de lo kafle l'tnei. You're saying the whole problem here is just that he didn't say, if this will be your get if you give me the paper back, and this will not be your get if you don't get the paper back. But ha kafle l'tnei, if he did say both sides, then lo havagita, then it wouldn't be a get, and she wouldn't be divorced. Well, michti called t'nai mehecha gamrin alav, but wait, it's still got another problem, because where do we learn all our laws of Tanaim from? Mitnai b'nei Gad and b'nei Reuven, right? We learned it all from the Tanai, the b'nei Gad and the b'nei Reuven. And another condition is ma hatam t'nai kodem lamaaseh. It said there, if you go, then you will go into the land. Notice here it says this will be your get if you do this. It's the opposite. It's the if should come first. If you do this, right? The stipulation comes before what will happen. Okay, and here the action comes, right? Hareza gitech, this will be your get, comes before the stipulation. So av kol t'nai kodem l'maaseh. So any t'nai that's going to be effective has to be the t'nai and then the maaseh. And this is why I say it's problematic, because we've been learning all along. This is your get if you do this, and we haven't set them in the opposite order. Anyway, they say, right, la fuke hacha de maaseh kodem l't'nai, and therefore this isn't a good condition. So that's why she's actually divorced, because the condition doesn't apply. Okay, so again, answers 2, 3, and 4, which we're going to get to, we haven't gotten to 4, are all going to be that the stipulation is just, it's not a good stipulation. It's not valid because it doesn't match the laws of the Bnei Gad and the Bnei Reuven. Ela amarava mishum demaseh kodem l'tnai. So therefore, amarava mishum demaseh kodem l'tnai. There comes your third answer. It must be that's the issue here, that the maaseh is before the condition, and it should be the reverse. But matkifla Rava de Rava, he comes and questions and says no, the same way Rava questioned the previous and then answered something else. He's going to do the same thing. If he had actually said it, if you give me back the paper, this will be your get, and if you don't, this won't, then it would have been a good get, because then it would have a Tanai kaful, the double, both permutations are given, and it would have the stipulation before the action. But mechti called Tanai mehecha gamrina lehu mitnai b'nei Gad b'nei Reuven. We already know where this is going, right? Where do we learn all the Tanaim from? From the rules of b'nei Gad and b'nei Reuven. And here's a third one. I told you we're going to roll them out one by one. Ma hatam Tanai b'davar achad u'maaseh b'davar achel. The Tanai, the stipulation was about going into the land, right? Fighting. And the action was you'll get your land, right? So it's saying, if you go first and go fight with the people, then you'll get the land that you want. Those are two totally different things. The stipulation has nothing to do with the action that's going to happen, with the result. But afkol, and therefore all Tanaim have to be like that. La fuke, to exclude what? Turning now to Amubet. our case, where T'nai u'maaseh b'davar echad. In this case, you have enough, and it's even if you resolve and you make it a double condition, and you make it the action comes after the stipulation, but it's still not going to be a good T'nai. Why? Because it's got the T'nai and the Maaser all one thing. It all has to do with, right? What does he say? This is your get in the condition that you return me the get. So the stipulation has to do with the actual action itself. So therefore, that's why this woman is divorced. And that's the difference in the ratio and the sefer. Because the stipulation and the action all had to do with the same thing. But Rav Ashi brings a fifth explanation. Rav Ashi Amar Hamani Rebbe. So again, let's just review for a quick minute before we get to the fifth one, because I want to categorize it. The first one was basically saying this is Rabban Shimon Gamliel's opinion, and it reflects a perception that you can substitute something else. So it had to do with the content here. But the fact that he said that stipulation is you give me back the paper, and then we assume the get is only taking place later, but it doesn't matter because she could still keep the paper because she just has to give him the amount of money of the paper, the value of it. And that would have been okay. But we said, right, we still had a problem with that because maybe Rabban Shimon Gamliel wouldn't say this if you actually still have the object in hand. Maybe you wouldn't be able to give its value. Then we suggested that perhaps it's all just that the stipulation is irrelevant here because you didn't do it in the way the Bnei Gad and the Bnei Reuven. We gave three issues that they had. Again, just to review, one is double. You have to say, if this, then that, and if not, then that. Or you also have to have the stipulation first and then the action. If you do this, then that will happen. And that wasn't the case here. Or the third was that you have to have the condition and the stipulation each being totally not related to each other. And here they are related to each other. But Rav Ashi comes and gives a different explanation entirely that kind of rejects the question. He says, Hamani Rebbe. You could say that this source goes according to Rebbe. The Amar Rav Huna Amar Rebbe. Kol Homer Almanat to Omer Me'achshav Dami. The whole premise of the question was off. The premise of the question was when you say Almanat, it means it's only going to kick in later. And that was what caused the whole problem. But if you say it kicks in now, then you actually have no problem. Because if it's effective immediately, then basically you're going to be saying, this is effective now. You can return me the paper later. When you return me the paper, right, it'll be that the get was actually effective from all the way back at the beginning. And at the beginning, she actually had the paper in hand and it was hers. So that's a possibility. Okay, that's probably the most likely possibility. Now we're going to move on. Atkin Shmuel Begita Dishchid. Shmuel said that when you have someone on their deathbed who wants to get a get, they should say the following: Im lo mati lo yehe get, ve'im mati yehe get. You can see why this came up here because of the double language. If I don't die, this will not be your get, and if I do die, this will be a get. Now the Gemara questions this: why would you say it in that way? Why don't you say v'lema imati yehe get? The whole point is you want to say what's the person really saying? If I die, I want this to be your get. So why wouldn't he put that first? That would be the most likely. Say, if I'm going to die, this is your get. And if I don't die, this won't be a get. But that would come second. And Shmuel said the reverse, right? And then it should be, so again, you should say, im mati yehe get, v'im lo mati lo yehe get. And if I don't die, it won't be a get. They say, no, you're not going to do it that way. Because lo mati inish puranuta lenafshi. People don't like to talk about bad things they're going to happen. You don't want to start with, if I die. You don't want to start saying that. You want to say, if I don't die, this won't be a get. But if I do die, you want to get to that part later. Vilema, if you really want to get to that part later, so then why don't you say, lo yehe get im lo mati? Why don't you just say, this won't be a get if I don't die? Meaning, instead of if I die, if I don't die, put the if I die at the very end. Say, this will be a get if I don't die. And that way, this will be a get if I die, or this will be a get if I don't die, and this will not be a get. This will not be a get if I don't die. This will be a get if I do die. And then you get to the die really at the end. So they say, no, well, that's because we already know this, be'inan t'nai kodem l'maaseh. You need to start with the stipulation. If I die, or if I don't die. So you could start with if I don't die, but you have to start with the dying part and get to it later. Matkef la Rava, michte kol t'nai mehecha gamlinan mitnai b'nei Gad u'b'nei Reuven. Going to go back to this again. If we learn laws of stipulations and conditions in statements, we learn it from Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven. Well, ma hatam hein kodem lalav av kol. Well, there it was if you go and then if you don't go. That means you have to do the yes one and then the no one if you don't. So this, we did the reverse because we want to get to the death at the end. But that doesn't fit with the rules of Tanaim like Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven. So, right, lav fuke is to exclude hachad lav kodem lahen. The lav comes first, it's no good. So, Ella Amar Rava. So Rava now changes what Shmuel said and said, this is really what you should say. And it sounds a little bit extreme, but im lo mati lo yehe get. You still want to start with lo, okay, even though you're supposed to start with hein. We'll see how we get around that the hein has to come before the lav. The yes has to come before the no. But we want to push off. We have all these things conflicting. We want to push off saying, people don't like to say, if I die. So you're going to start with, if I don't die, this won't be a get. If I do die, this will be a get. Imati yehe get. And then again you say, im lo mati lo yehe get. But if I don't die, this won't be a get. Like that. Okay? And im lo mati, now we're going to go through why the order like this. Why we're going to do all three like that. Im lo mati lo yehe get, because lo makdimin is according to lenafshe. You start with if I don't die because you don't want to start talking about the bad stuff. Im mati yehe get, im lo mati lo yehe get. Well, that's because of inan hein lav kodem hein kodem lalav. So that's how we're going to end up saying the statement 3 times. Okay? If I don't die, this won't be a get. If I do, that's so we push off saying if I die. Then you say if I die, this will be a get. But then you still have to say if I don't die so that the lav comes after the hein. Now moving on to the next mission. He gives her a get, under the condition, though, that she helps serve his father. She takes care of his father. That you nurse my son. Now notice it didn't say how long. So how long does she have to, at least for the nursing the child? Well, shtei shanim. That's the typical nursing is 2 years, 24 months. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, 12 chodesh. Now this debate between them comes up in another case. A woman, when she's nursing and her husband dies, she's not, or even if she's pregnant and the husband dies, she's not allowed to marry another man, very strange law, until she's finished nursing. And there's machloket there, the same machloket is here. Is it 2 years or is it 18 months? And the concern is that he'll want to get her pregnant and that will put this baby at risk because the baby won't have what to nurse and he won't want to pay for breast milk from someone else, and that will be a problem. So therefore, they don't allow a woman to get remarried within that time period. So here you see the same machloket, is it 2 years or 18 months? But basically the assumption is, he says, nurse my child. That must mean 12, until, the end of the time a woman would nurse the baby. Meit haben, osha meit ha'av, if the son dies, though, within that time period, or the father dies within, now they don't really give a time frame for the father, but I guess it means, serve my father until he dies. When the father dies or when the son dies, it's a get, right? The get is valid, even though she stops doing it. Well, she stops doing it because they're not alive anymore, or they don't need nursing anymore. In both these cases, they're dead, right? So if they die, she doesn't need it, right? The conditions met already because she did what he wanted. At this point, he doesn't need it. It was out of need, basically. That's the idea. What if you say, this is your get. You gave a time limit to it. You served my father for 2 years. Now we have an issue because you said for 2 years, if metaben, either the son dies, or, which could be a daughter also, by the way, or the father says, I'm not willing to have you serve me. I don't want you helping me out here. Shelo b'hakpada eino get. If it wasn't her fault, if it wasn't because the father was angry at her, okay? If the father was angry at her, well, then it's her fault. But here it wasn't her fault. He just said, I want someone else to take care of me. I don't want you to take care of me. That's not a get because she didn't fulfill the condition. He said 2 years and she didn't do 2 years. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel disagrees and says, Omel kazeh get. This is a get because it wasn't her fault. But klal amar Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, kol akava she'ena himena harei ze get. As long as it's not her fault, it's not a get. If it's her fault, she got the father very angry, and then the father said, I don't want you to serve me. Well, then Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel would agree, it's not a get. So now the Gemara asks a question, okay, and asks the following: Umi be'inan kulehai. Do you really need, in the first case, he didn't give any specified time. How do we get to this 2 years and 18 months? Now, I explained very well how we got to it, but they're going to say that this contradicts a Tosefta. If you work for him for 1 day, or you nurse the baby for 1 day, that's a get. You fulfill the condition by doing it just for 1 day. So how does our Mishnah get off to 2 years, 18 months? Amar Rav Chisda, so we're going to have 3 answers to this question. Rav Chisda says, Lo kasha. Ha Rabbanan, ha Rabban Shimon Gamliel. Okay, how are we going to explain this? Matnitin, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Why is our Mishnah Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel? Because Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says what? He says in the Itzdalit case, you can give the value. Why do you give the value? Because what did the husband want? The husband wanted results. He wanted benefit, right? He wanted his Itzdalit. He doesn't care whether he gets the Itzdalit or he gets the value of it. Likewise here. Basically, the Mishnah says he wanted the child nursed. The child needs nursing for 18 months or for 24 months, and that's what he meant. Until that's fulfilled, that's not it. But Braita Rabbanan, who took it literally, in the previous Mishnah, he wanted the Itzdalit. Okay, he said Itzdalit, he means Itzdalit. He said here, serve my father. Serve my father could be done in 1 day. You could serve the father. Nurse the baby. Okay, I nursed the baby today. Well, I'm done. So now they say, okay, wait, that doesn't really make sense, though, to say that our Mishnah is Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Why? Because in the beginning of the Mishnah, we have this debate. Tanakama is it 2 years, Rabbi Yehuda it's 18 months. We're going to assume Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda probably both follow Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel's opinion. But what's the problem? The problem is that the end of the Mishnah quotes Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, right? Remember, he says, Kazeh Ged, if you did the 2 years and then it wasn't her fault, and then the father said, I don't want you doing it, and then this is his klal, and that's all Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. He doesn't appear in the beginning. It's very hard to say that. Hami de sefer Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel habe, bichal dereisha la Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Sounds like it's not. Ela Braita, but the Braita, which is really a Tosefta, we're going to give a second answer. The Braita is Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. To make b'tnai matnit in Rabbanan. We're going to connect it to that same machloka, but we're going to look at them from a different perspective. You could, before we said Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel was all concerned about the result. He wanted the money, so he got the money. What's the difference if he got his cloak or he got money of the cloak? But here we're going to say that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, by saying she could return the cloak, the money of the value of it, is just being lenient when it comes to stipulations. So here also we'll be lenient. You said, serve my father. What's the lenient definition? 1 day. Okay. And the Mishnah is the rabbis who said, he said, Itzdalit, you have to give the Itzdalit. He said, nurse my baby. Nurse my baby is this typical amount of nursing a child, 2 years. Okay, so he's stricter about it. Rava Amal, third answer, lo kasha, kam b'stam, kam b'mefaresh. So what does this mean? If you stam, you didn't say any amount, okay, that's our Mishnah. If you didn't say any amount, we assume stam is 2 years. But kam b'mefaresh, if you said 1 day, then you mean 1 day. So now, Rav Ashi Amal, right? So if you specified 1 day, then it's going to be 1 day. Now, what you say, what's the chiddush? Okay, so you said 1 day. Obviously, it's 1 day. What would the Mishnah be teaching you in saying that? So they explain that what it means is, if he says, serve my father for 1 day, and you do it, let's say 3 weeks from then, that's your fulfillment of the condition. You don't have to assume he meant 1 day, meaning today or tomorrow or something like that. It has to be immediate. No, you could do it over time. Rav Ashi says, I don't agree with you, Rava, because kol stam nami kimafarish yom echad. Stam, if you say stam, you actually really mean just 1 day. It's the opposite of what you said. You said stam means the 2 years or the 18 months. I say stam means 1 day. So now we're going to bring a Mishnah. Tanan, our Mishnah. Tamahi menikto shtei shanim. Rabbi Yehuda omer 12 chodesh. So now we're going to bring this as a question on Rav Ashi. Bishlama leRabbanit. To Rava, this makes perfect sense. Because notice, it's stam. You didn't give any amount, and it's 2 years. That matches Rava perfectly. Ela leRav Ashi, lama li shtei shanim, lama li 12 chodesh, b'yom echad sageh. If you think that stam is 1 day, then why in the beginning of our Mishnah, when it said stam and he didn't specify any amount of time, we meant not one day. We meant not one day, but 18 months or 2 years. So this is the way Rav Ashi is going to explain our mission. Hachi Kamar. Yom echad mishtei shanim, la'afuke la'achar shtei shanim delo. It has to be one day within the first 2 years of the child's life, or one day within the first 18 months of the child's life, right? Yom echad mishnei asar chodesh la'afuke la'achar shnei asar chodesh delo. You can't fulfill the condition after the allotted time that a child normally gets nursed. That's what it was telling you. So now Rav Ashi understands the Mishnah totally against the simple reading. When it says 2 years or 18 months, it means it has to be one day within those 2 years or 18 months, and that resolves the question against Rav Ashi. Now we're going to bring another question from Braita. I'll only start reading the Braita. We're only going to get to the explanation of the difficulty tomorrow. Okay, this is a case, this is your get. If, right, under the condition that you serve my father for 2 years or my son for 2 years, so that's the next case in our Mishnah, and we're going to take this case and we're going to question Rav Ashi as well. So we'll leave that for tomorrow and how we resolve that. So going back to a review of our daf, we started with this case of the Takana of Hillel for the people who try to hide, and we had 2 ways of reading what you can infer from there. Is it the Baal Korcho, that against your will you can't give someone money in general, and the Takana was yes? Or is it that not when they're not there, not in their presence? And then each time we suggested it was either that or the other, we rejected it by suggesting the other possibility, and that maybe that's not what it's saying, maybe it's the other. Okay, that was that first. Then we went to this, we just brought this statement that we've seen a bunch of times already about Rabbi Yochanan, that we always hold like Rashbag when he appears in the Mishnah, other than 3 cases, and one of them is our Mishnah with the Itztali. Then we went to this Braita about the paper, and we explained the second case of Almanach Katziri Le'Taniyam Guresha, which we didn't really understand how that could be. We gave 5 different explanations. 3 of them had to do with that the condition's just not a good condition because it's not like the Bnei Gad and the Bnei Reuven. And then the other 2 were other ways of trying to have it make sense. Then we talked about what Shmuel said, I should say, because we were talking about conditions. So how he should say the condition of if I die, this will be a get, in order to fulfill all the conditions that we saw before about the Bnei Gad and the Bnei Reuven, and also at the same time not say right away if I die, because he doesn't really want to be saying that. Then we got to, and then Shmuel, there was a bit of a problem with Shmuel, so Rava kind of changed Shmuel's, adapted it a little bit. Then we got to this Mishnah about the case, this is your get on the condition that you serve my father, nurse my child. Is there a time limitation? How do we view this? Stam, all that. And really, it was all because we brought this Tosefta, which said that one day is enough, where our Mishnah said 2 years or 18 months. And then we tried to resolve how this is. Is it Rashbag Rabbanan or Rabbanan Rashbag? We gave both possibilities based on the Itzlalit one and how you view Rashbag. Is it just that he's lenient, or is it that he gives other possibilities, whereas the rabbis take it very literally? Okay, so there were 2 different possibilities about how to see that. And then Rava said it's a difference whether you just said it's stam, then we assume 2 months, versus when you specified only 1 day. And then Rav Ashi disagreed with him and said stam is actually the reverse. And then we started bringing questions on Rav Ashi from our Mishnah, and then we had to reread our Mishnah in order to fit into Rav Ashi, because in our Mishnah, stam sounded like 18 months or 2 years. How did he say it's 1 day? And he basically had to explain it. It's 1 day within those 2 years or within those 18 months. That's it for today. Wishing everybody a great day.